Section 3 of Philosophical Rudiments Concerning Government and Society by Thomas Hobbes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Church. Philosophical Elements of a True Citizen. Liberty. Chapter 1. Of the State of Men Without Civil Society. 1. The Introduction. 2. That the beginning of civil societies from mutual fear. 3. That men by nature are all equal. 4. Whence the will of mischieving each other ariseth. 5. The discord arising from comparison of wits. 6. From the appetite many have to the same thing. 7. The definition of right. 8. A right to the end gives right to the means necessary to that end. 9. By the right of nature, every man is judge of the means which tend to his own preservation. 10. By nature all men have equal rights to all things. 11. This right which all men have to all things is unprofitable. 12. The state of men without civil society is a mere state of war. The definitions of peace and war. 13. War is an adversary to man's preservation. 14. It is lawful for any man by natural right to compel another whom he hath gotten into his power to give caution of his future obedience. 15. Nature dictates the seeking after peace. 1. The faculties of human nature may be reduced unto four kinds: bodily strength, experience, reason, passion. Taking the beginning of this following doctrine from these, we will declare in the first place what manner of inclinations men who are endued with these faculties bear towards each other, and whether and by what faculty they are born apt for society, and to preserve themselves against mutual violence. Then proceeding, we will show what advice was necessary to be taken for this business, and what are the conditions of society, or of human peace; that is to say, changing the words only, what are the fundamental laws of nature. 2. The greatest part of those men who have written aught concerning commonwealths either suppose or require us or beg of us to believe that man is a creature born fit for society. Footnote. Since we now see actually a constituted society among men, and none living out of it, since we discern all desirous of congress and mutual correspondence, it may seem a wonderful kind of stupidity to lay in the very threshold of this doctrine such a stumbling block before the reader as to deny man to be born fit for society. Therefore I must more plainly say, that it is true indeed, that to man by nature, or as man, that is, as soon as he is born, solitude is an enemy. For infants have need of others to help them to live, and those of riper years to help them live well. Wherefore I deny not that men, even nature compelling, desire to come together. But civil societies are not mere meetings, but bonds, to the making whereof faith and compacts are necessary. The virtue whereof to children and fools, and the profit whereof to those who have not yet tasted the miseries which accompany its defects, is altogether unknown. Whence it happens that those, because they know not what society is, cannot enter into it. These, because ignorant of the benefit it brings, care not for it. Manifest therefore it is, that all men, because they are born in infancy, are born unapt for society. Many also, perhaps most men, either through defect of mind or want of education, remain unfit during the whole course of their lives. Yet have they, infants as well as those of riper years, a human nature. Wherefore man is made fit for society not by nature but by education. Furthermore, although man were born in such condition as to desire it, it follows not that he therefore were born fit to enter into it. For it is one thing to desire, another thing to be in capacity fit for what we desire. For even they, who through their pride will not stoop to equal conditions, without which there can be no society, do yet desire it. End of footnote. The Greeks call him zoon politikon, and on this foundation they so build up the doctrine of civil society, as if for the preservation of peace, and the government of mankind, there were nothing else necessary than that men should agree to make certain covenants and conditions together, which themselves should then call laws. Which axiom, though received by most, is yet certainly false, and an error proceeding from our too slight contemplation of human nature. For they who shall more narrowly look into the causes for which men come together, and delight in each other's company, shall easily find that this happens not because naturally it could happen no otherwise, but by accident. For if by nature one man should love another, that is, as man, there could no reason be returned why every man should not equally love every man, as being equally man, or why he should rather frequent those whose society affords him honor or profit. We do not therefore by nature seek society for its own sake, but that we may receive some honor or profit from it. These we desire primarily, and that secondarily. How, by what advice men do meet, will be best known by observing those things which they do when they are met. For if they meet for traffic, it is plain every man regards not his fellow, but his business. If he do discharge some office, a certain market friendship is begotten, which hath more of jealousy in it than true love, and whence factions sometimes may arrive, but goodwill never. If for pleasure and recreation of mind every man is wont to please himself most with those things which stir up laughter, whence he may, according to the nature of that which is ridiculous, by comparison of another man's defects and infirmities, pass the more current in his own opinion. And although this be sometimes innocent and without offence, yet it is manifest they are not so much delighted with the society as with their own vain glory. But for the most part, in these kinds of meetings we wound the absent. Their whole life, sayings, actions, are examined, judged, condemned. Nay, it is very rare but some present receive a fling as soon as they are part. So as his reason was not ill, who was wont always at parting to go out last. And these are indeed the true delights of society, unto which we are carried by nature, that is, by those passions which are incident to all creatures, until either by sad experience or good precepts it so fall out, which in many it never happens, that the appetite of present matters be dulled with the memory of things past. Without which the discourse of most quick and nimble men on this subject is but cold and hungry. But if it so happen, that being met they pass their time in relating some stories, and one of them begins to tell one which concerns himself, instantly every one of the rest most greedily desires to speak of himself too. If one relates some wonder, the rest will tell you miracles, if they have them. If not, they will feign them. Lastly, that I may say somewhat of them who pretend to be wiser than others. If they meet to talk of philosophy, look how many men, so many would be esteemed masters, or else they not only love not their fellows, but even persecute them with hatred. So clear is it by experience to all men who a little more narrowly consider human affairs, that all free congress ariseth either from mutual poverty, or from vain glory, whence the parties met endeavour to carry with them either some benefit, or else leave behind them the same euskaimein, some esteem or honour with these, with whom they have been conversant. The same is also collected by reason out of definitions themselves of will, good, honour, profitable. For when we voluntarily contract society, and all manner of society will look after the object of the will, that is, that which every one of those who gather together propounds to himself for good. Now whatsoever seems good is pleasant, and relates either to the senses or to the mind. But all the mind's pleasure is either glory, or to have a good opinions of oneself, or refers to glory in the end. The rest are sensual, or conducing to sensuality, which may be all comprehended under the word conveniences. All society therefore is either for gain or for glory, that is, not so much for love of our fellows, as for the love of ourselves. But no society can be great or lasting which begins from vain glory, because that glory is like honour. If all men have it, no man hath it, for they consist in comparison and precellence. Neither doth the society of others advance any whit the cause of my glorying in myself, for every man must account himself such as he can make himself without the help of others. But though the benefits of this life may be much furthered by mutual help, since yet those may be better attained to by dominion than by the society of others, I hope nobody will doubt but that men would much more greedily be carried by nature, if all fear were removed, to obtain opinion than to gain society. We must therefore resolve, that the original of all great and lasting societies consisted not in the mutual goodwill men had toward each other, but in their mutual fear they had of each other. Footnote. It is objected, it is so improbable that men should grow into civil societies out of fear, that if they had been afraid, they would not have endured each other's looks. They presume, I believe, that to fear is nothing else than to be affrighted. I comprehend in this word fear a certain foresight of future evil. Neither do I conceive flight the sole property of fear, but to distrust, suspect, take heed, provide so that they may not fear, is also incident to the fearful. They who go to sleep shut their doors. They who travel carry their swords with them because they fear thieves. Kingdoms guard their coasts and frontiers with forts and castles. Cities are compact with walls, and all for fear of neighboring kingdoms and towns. Even the strongest armies and most accomplished for fight, yet sometimes parley for peace, as fearing each other's power, and lest they might be overcome. It is through fear that men secure themselves by flight indeed, and in corners if they think that they cannot escape otherwise, but for the most part by arms and defensive weapons, whence it happens that daring to come forth they know each other's spirits. But then if they fight, civil society riseth from the victory, if they agree, from their agreement. End of footnote. 3. The cause of mutual fear consists partly in the natural equality of men, partly in their mutual will of hurting, whence it comes to pass, that we can neither expect from others, nor promise to ourselves the least security. For if we look on men full grown, and consider how brittle the frame of our human body is, which perishing, all its strength, vigour, and wisdom itself perisheth with it, and how easy a matter it is, even for the weakest man, to kill the strongest, there is no reason why any man, trusting to his own strength, should conceive himself made by nature above others. They are equals, who can do equal things one against another. But they who can do the greatest things, namely kill, can do equal things. All men, therefore, among themselves are by nature equal. The inequality we now discern hath its spring from the civil law. 4. All men in the state of nature have a desire and will to hurt, but not proceeding from the same cause, neither equally to be condemned. For one man, according to that natural equality which is among us, permits as much to others as he assumes to himself, which is an argument of the temperate man, and one that rightly values his power. Another, supposing himself above others, will have a license to do what he lists, and challenges respect and honour, as due to him before others, which is an argument of a fiery spirit. This man's will to hurt ariseth from vain glory, and the false esteem he hath of his own strength, the others from the necessity of defending himself, his liberty and his goods, against this man's violence. 5. Furthermore, since the combat of wits is the fiercest, the greatest discords which are must necessarily arise from this contention. For in this case it is not only odious to contend against, but also not to consent. For not to approve of what a man saith, is no less than tacitly to accuse him of an error in that thing which he speaketh, as in very many things to dissent, is as much as if you accounted him a fool whom you dissent from. Which may appear hence, that there are no wars so sharply waged as between sects of the same religion, and factions of the same commonweal, where the contestation is either concerning doctrines or politic prudence. And since all the pleasure and jollity of the mind consists in this, even to get some, with whom comparing it may find somewhat wherein to triumph and vaunt itself, it is impossible but men must declare the sometimes some mutual scorn and contempt, either by laughter, or by words, or by gesture, or some sign or other, than which there is no greater vexation of mind, and then from which there cannot possibly arise a greater desire to do hurt. 6. But the most frequent reason why men desire to hurt each other ariseth hence, that many men at the same time have an appetite to the same thing, which very often they can neither enjoy in common, nor yet divide it. Whence it follows that the strongest must have it, and who is strongest must be decided by the sword. 7. Among so many dangers, therefore, as the natural lusts of men do daily threaten each other withal, to have a care of one's own self is so far from being a matter scornfully to be looked upon, then one has neither the power nor wish to have done otherwise. For every man is desirous of what is good for him, and shuns what is evil, but chiefly the chiefest of natural evils, which is death. And this he doth by a certain impulsion of nature, no less than that whereby a stone moves downward. It is therefore neither absurd nor reprehensible, either against the dictates of true reason, for a man to use all his endeavours to preserve and defend his body and his members thereof from death and sorrows, but that which is not contrary to right reason, that all men account to be done justly and with right. Neither by the word right is anything else signified, than that liberty which every man hath to make use of his natural faculties according to right reason. Therefore the first foundation of natural right is this, that every man, as much as in him lies endeavour to protect his life and members. 8. But because it is vain for a man to have a right to the end, if the right to the necessary means be denied him, it follows, that since every man hath a right to preserve himself, he must also be allowed a right to use all the means, and do all the actions, without which he cannot preserve himself. 9. Now whether the means which he is about to use, and the action he is performing, be necessary to the preservation of his life and members or not, he himself, by the right of nature, must be judge. For if it be contrary to right reason that I should judge of mine own peril, say that another man is judge. Why now, because he judgeth of what concerns me, by the same reason, because we are equal by nature, will I judge also of things which do belong to him. Therefore it agrees with right reason that it is the right of nature that I judge of his opinion, that is, whether it conduce to my preservation or not. 10. Nature hath given to every one a right to all, that is, it was lawful for every man in the bare state of nature. Footnote. This is thus to be understood. What any man does in the bare state of nature is injurious to no man. Not that in such a state he cannot offend God, or break the laws of nature, for injustice against men presupposeth human laws, such as in the state of nature there are none. Now the truth of this proposition is thus conceived, sufficiently demonstrated to the mindful reader in the articles immediately foregoing. But because in certain cases the difficulty of the conclusion makes us forget the premises, I will contract this argument, and make it most evident to a single view. Every man hath right to protect himself, as appears by a 7th article. The same man therefore hath a right to use all the means which necessarily conduce to his end, by the 8th article. But those are necessary which means which he shall judge to be such, by the 9th article. He therefore hath a right to make use of, and to do all whatsoever he shall judge requisite for his preservation. Wherefore, by the judgment of him that doth it, the thing done is either right or wrong, and therefore right. True it is therefore in the bare state of nature, etc. But if any man pretend somewhat to tend necessarily to his preservation, which yet he himself doth not confidently believe so, he may offend against the laws of nature, as in the 3rd chapter of this book is more at large declared. It hath been objected by some, if a son kill his father, doth he him no injury? I have answered that a son cannot be understood to be at any time in the state of nature, as being under the power and command of them to whom he owes his protection as soon as he ever is born, namely either his father's or his mother's, or him that nourished him, as is demonstrated in the 9th chapter. End of footnote. Or before such time as men had engaged themselves by any covenants or bonds, to do what he would, and against whom he thought fit, and to possess, use, and enjoy all what he would or could get. Now because whatsoever a man would, it therefore seems good to him because he wills it, and either it really doth, or at least seems to him to contribute towards his preservation. But we have already allowed him to be judge in the foregoing article, whether it doth or not, insomuch as we are to hold all for necessary whatsoever he shall esteem so. And by the 7th article, it appears that by the right of nature, those things may be done, and must be had, which necessarily conduce to the protection of life and members. It follows, that in the state of nature, to have all, and to do all, is lawful to all. And this is that which is meant by that common saying, nature hath given all to all. From whence we understand likewise that in the state of nature profit is the measure of right. 11. But it was the least benefit for men thus to have a common right to all things. for the effects of this right are the same, almost as if they had been no right at all. For although any man might say of everything, "This is mine," yet could he not enjoy it, by reason of his neighbor, who having equal right and equal power, would pretend the same to be his. 12. If now to this natural proclivity of men to hurt each other, which they derive from their passions, but chiefly from a vain esteem of themselves, you add the right of all to all, wherewith one by right invades, the other by right resists, and whence arise perpetual jealousies and suspicions on all hands, and how hard a thing it is to provide against an enemy invading us with an intention to oppress and ruin, though he come with a small number and no great provision. It cannot be denied but that the natural state of men, before they entered into society, was a mere war, and that not simply, but a war of all men against all men. For what is war, but that same time in which the will of contesting by force is fully declared, either by words or deeds? The time remaining is termed peace. 13. But it is easily judged how disagreeable a thing to the preservation either of mankind or each single man a perpetual war is. But it is perpetual in its own nature, because in regard of the equality of those that strive, it cannot be ended by victory. For in this state the conqueror is subject to so much danger, as if it were to be accounted a miracle if any, even the most strong, should close up his life with many years in old age. They of America are examples hereof, even in this present age. Other nations have been in former ages, which now indeed are become civil and flourishing, but were then few, fierce, short-lived, poor, nasty, and deprived of all that pleasure and beauty of life which peace and society are wont to bring with them. Whosoever therefore holds that it had been best to have continued in that state in which all things were lawful for all men, he contradicts himself. For every man by natural necessity desires that which is good for him, nor is there any that esteems a war of all against all, which necessarily adheres to such a state to be good for him. And so it happens, that through fear of each other we think it fit to rid ourselves of this condition, and to get some fellows, that if there needs must be war, it may not yet be against all men, nor without some helps. 14. Fellows are gotten either by constraint or by consent. By constraint, whether after fight the conqueror makes the conquered serve him, either through fear of death, or by laying fetters on him. By consent, when men enter into society to help each other, both parties consenting without any constraint. But the conqueror may by right compel the conquered, or the strongest the weaker, as a man in health may one that is sick, or he that is of riper years a child, unless he will choose to die, to give caution of his future obedience. For since the right of protecting ourselves according to our own wills proceeded from our danger, and our danger from our equality, it is more consonant to reason and more certain of our conservation, using the present advantage to secure ourselves by taking caution, than when they shall be grown full and strong, and got out of our power, to endeavour to recover that power again by doubtful fight. And on the other side, nothing can be thought more absurd than by discharging whom you already have weak in your power, to make him at once both an enemy and a strong one. From whence we may understand likewise as a corollary in the natural state of man, that a sure and irresistible power confers the right of dominion and ruling over those who cannot resist, insomuch as the right of all things that can be done adheres essentially and immediately unto this omnipotence hence arising. 15. Yet cannot men expect any lasting preservation, continuing thus in the state of nature, that is, of war, by reason of that equality of power, and other human faculties they are endued withal. Wherefore to seek peace, where there is any hopes of obtaining it, and where there is none, to inquire out for auxiliaries of war, is the dictate of right reason, that is, the law of nature, as shall be shown in the next chapter. End of section 3. Recording by Jeffrey Church.